All right, so I'll just go ahead and get started. So yeah, I've been contracting as an engineer my entire career. So I've never done a full-time job, at least in the conventional sense, where I was a salaried employee, working on a salaried basis, 40-hour work week, anything like that. Typical year for me, I would have anywhere between 3 and 5 clients. Since going back to around 2012, which is when I started, and it's been just a sort of an ongoing cycle of that for the past 6 years. I haven't been contracting as much lately, but I did just wrap up a big contract last couple of weeks ago. So I'm still in the game very much, but I don't contract as much as I used to. I did want to do this video about some nightmare clients I've had in the past and why they were nightmare clients and how I handled those situations. I haven't had bad clients lately. It's been a couple of years, as a matter of fact. It's been since about 2015 since I've had anyone I would consider a nightmare client. So one thing I'm realizing is that as you get better and better in your skill level, your client base also proportionally improves as you improve. So I'm starting to realize now that I'm in year 6 of my career professionally, that my client base is also increasingly or proportionally has improved as my skill level and my rates have improved. So most of these stories go back to like 2012, 2013, and 2014. And since around that time, I haven't really had any nightmare clients. So yeah, definitely the worst year were the first 2 years. I had some real dirtbag clients, and it was really a learning experience. So I'll just go through a couple, and if you have any questions or anything like that, or if you have any questions about just even just regular coding stuff, I have this up right now because this is the project I'm working on right now, for my own stuff. This is all React Redux, the usual nonsense. And if you have any questions about how I'm putting it together, I'm happy to answer those too. So I'll go back to my first real client. Um, so I guess what makes there are a handful of things that characterize a nightmare client in my estimation, and basically they boil down to unrealistic expectations, which almost everyone has. Um, Poor payment. Some people who just refuse to pay on time, or just don't. They're always late, or they try to haggle with payment all the time. I did deal with that a little bit lately, but we resolved it to our mutual satisfaction. Those are the two biggest things, and then just regular, like just real dirtbag behavior. So one client I had back in 2012, it was an iOS app, and because I was an iOS developer primarily from 2012 to about 2014, that's about all I did. And the idea was that I would try out for a couple weeks working for free, and then if they decided to hire me or use my code after my audition period, they would pay me for that time period. They would retroactively pay me, and then we would come to terms on an agreement. I've mentioned in previous videos that that's a technique I've used in the past to secure new clients, and it usually works. So that's what happened here. In this case, this is a New York City startup. It's two guys. It was two guys, and they were building just your typical social networking iPhone app circa 2012. So just a couple kids trying to become the next Facebook. And so yeah, I did that. So for 2 weeks, about 20 hours a week, so roughly 40 hours total, I'm putting together like a rough mock-up / prototype for these guys. And obviously we're communicating along the way, but at the end of that period, I provided my prototype, and we went through a few bugs and whatnot. And then we couldn't come to terms on compensation. So that's number one mistake. I should have had that conversation hashed out before I even started, but we couldn't come to terms on what I considered reasonable compensation. They wanted to pay me $3,000 a month and then equity. So like $3,000 a month is like, that's a paltry sum in New York City. Like that's not even what I'm making a week, to be honest, like for contracting. So like I couldn't survive on that. So I also knew that it wasn't market rate. That's the more important point, is that it wasn't market rate for what I'd be doing. It was 2012, so it was my first real year as a professional. So let's say my market rate at that time was about $30 an hour, which is probably reasonable at that point. $30 an hour, and they wanted full time, so 40 hours a week, right? So that's $1,200 a week times 4, which comes out to almost $5,000 a week, right? And they were trying to negotiate $3,000 a week plus equity. And then so the next question is, well, how much equity? Well, the equity they were proposing was one half of 1% over a 4-year vesting schedule. So at the end of 4 years, I would own 1/2 of 1% of this company, of said company. And I was like, that's a joke. Like that's not gonna, no, like just why don't you just pay me just straight cash then? Like I don't want the equity at all. Then just give me all cash, pure cash compensation. And there was we don't have the cash. So after about a week of that, excuse me, we agreed to disagree. We had come to terms with the fact that we're not going to come together on compensation, and that they were going to move forward without me, and that was the end of that. But the arrangement was, you don't own the code. Yeah, after the boot camp, I'll answer that question after I'm done with the story real quick. But that's a good question, so I'll answer that real quick after I finish the story real quick. So the agreement was, okay, if we can't come to terms on a compensation package, we part ways and nobody uses the code. All right, the code it belongs to me, and that's it. And you find a new developer and start from scratch, because I wasn't paid for anything, right? So that's how I thought it ended. And then lo and behold, about 4 or 5 months later, I find their app in the App Store, the iPhone App Store, running literally my code. They didn't change it at all. They just literally put my code in the App Store and published it under their company name. And yeah, obviously I didn't like that. And so immediately I called my lawyer, and I had my lawyer write a pretty threatening letter saying, you got to take that down literally now. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with me at my rates, which is a lot more than what Dan Kwan charges. So they took it down literally. I remember my lawyer sent the email, and they took it down literally like 45 minutes later. And then they sent me and my lawyer an email saying, according to the NDA that I signed over like what's called an assignment of indentions, which means everything I write on their behalf they own. But we didn't sign any contracts. Like I was never provisioned under the company as a contract engineer. So an NDA does not sign over rights doesn't sign you over those rights if there's no actual working agreement. So that was pretty easy to poke a hole into. And yeah, my lawyer was like, yeah, this is pretty much a joke. So if you guys want to pursue this the hard way, we can do this, and you're not gonna have a good time. So I lawyered up real quick on that because I trust my lawyer. I've had my lawyer for a number of years. I like him. He always has my best interest at heart. He does charge me a fuck ton of money, so he better have my best interest at heart. But for what I pay, he protects my interests very, very well. And in this case, he did that successfully. So that was my first sort of foray into the startup world in New York City. And I kind of learned a lesson the hard way, which is don't ever enter a work agreement without negotiating all the particulars. Make sure all that stuff is taken care of before you begin anything. And if that means you don't actually get started, you don't get a client. Well, what that really means is that you never had the client anyway. The client was never there for you anyway. That's something that people tend not to understand, especially beginners, is that they're like, well, I don't want to lose this client. I need to I need to bend over backwards. I need to make sure that like if he wants me to work for free, or like if he needs, if he needs me to do like all this other stuff that, I'm not being paid for. That's not the right attitude. Provided that you're delivering what they want, provided that your skill level can back it up. All right. So it's not, this is not a blanket policy, but, provided that you actually have the skills to deliver what your client wants, then if you have to keep on bending over backwards and giving all these concessions, well, what I find is that what that really means is you never actually had the client. The client was never there for you to take in the first place, and that they would just drain you for as much free stuff as they can until you give up. Right now, that's essentially the dynamics at play there. So that's how that first situation ended. So before I move on to the next one, after the boot camp, I'll answer your question. So in 2012, around this time, so late spring, early summer 2012, I got a job at a development dev shop in Brooklyn. which is run by a team of software engineers who basically just quit their full-time jobs and started their own development shop, a dev shop. And they hired me to work on an iOS app that was commissioned by ESPN. They had a whole team of people working on it. And it was meant for the baseball season. So my contract lasted throughout the duration of the baseball season. So this went on through the World Series of 2012, which I believe was the Cardinals, I think, was in that World Series. And yeah, I think so. And that, during that stretch of time, that was the only contract I was working on. That was a full-time contract that I was doing in Brooklyn every day. So it was 40 hours a week for about 5 months, 4 or 5 months. And during that time, I learned more in that period than I learned in literally everything I had done up to that point combined, which is about 2 years. So yeah, roughly 2 years. So everything I learned in that 5 months far exceeded what I taught myself in the preceding 2 years in terms of just coding standards, best practices, coding professionally, and just being better, just being a better iOS developer in general. And once that was over and we put the app out, I had some real credibility to my name at that point, and I was able to leverage that into more contracts afterwards, going into 2014. So, I'm sorry, 2013. So once I circled into 2013, I had much more confidence in my skills because at that point I had experienced a code base that was truly professional, and really, really got me up to speed much faster than I can do on my own. Because what beginners don't tend to understand is that what they learn in boot camps or like websites like Code Academy or even my website Turbo 360, what they learn there is nowhere near professional grade. Hey, Top TV Clips, no problem. Only 7 people. That's actually not bad for me. It's usually more like 3 or 4. So, but yeah, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, after having gone through that experience, I truly understood what it means to be working on a professional assignment. And I also understood that it was nowhere near what I thought it was. It was actually much, much more difficult, much more overwhelming. And I knew that I had to get through it, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to just reach that next level. I wouldn't be able to move on to that next level. And that's when I felt professional. So I would say chronologically, that was the end of 2013. So excuse me, the end of 2013. So that's when I felt like I was truly professional. And that was only because of the experience I had at the dev shop in Brooklyn. So without that, it would have been a much longer trajectory for me. I think I still would be where I am today. It just would have been much harder. It would have taken much longer. Not that the job was easy; it was very difficult, but it really accelerated my process by a lot. It was like going from jogging to sprinting, and that's essentially what it was. So obviously that's not one of my nightmare clients. That was one of my best clients, if not the best client I ever had. But going back to the main topic here, another nightmare client I had. This one goes back to payment now. I had a client, same year, 2012, that they were producing these bracelets with these QR codes. You guys may remember QR codes that were like supposed to be the next big thing back around 2012. This company was producing bracelets that you can wear with these QR codes, and the QR codes would like link to your personal social network, so Facebook, Instagram, whatever. I don't really care about like telling the company product at this point, because the company doesn't exist anymore. They went out of business like not long after I left. And same exact deal. The deal was I will work for them for free for a week. I did this offer a lot because I knew I wasn't good enough to be demanding. But then once we come to terms and they agree to work with me on a contract basis, that they pay for me retroactively. They pay for that week. But if they decide that it's not good enough, then no harm, no foul. Nobody owes me any money. I move on. I lick my wounds and I move on. Well, they did agree to my work, and we did agree to a contract, and we came to terms monetarily that I agreed to. And that the terms were that I would come back to their office, which is 45 minutes away, once a week to touch base and then collect payment. So I went back the first week under the contract terms now. So I went back the following week with the updated code, which they liked, and they said it's good to go. And then I said, all right, good. I'm glad you like it. Where's my money? Obviously more professional, but we discussed this, and it's time to pay me. And the guy, the tech lead there, was like, oh yeah, well, our main guy, his name is Brad. I don't care about spelling names at this point. His name is Brad. He's like, Brad's not here right now. He's doing a meeting with a couple investors, so he can't pay you without signing the checks, physically signing the check. So we can't pay you unless Brad is here. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I can't like change the fact that he's not physically here. So I just went home, but I sent Brad and the tech lead, his name is Steve, and I sent Brad's wife, which was the co-founder. Brad and his wife co-founded this company. I sent Brad's wife. I CC'd everyone in the email saying, look, we clearly talked about this. I trust that this is just an innocent mistake, but don't let it happen again. Like, don't let it happen again. I expect that next time I'm in the office, that everyone's prepared with the proper, everyone's ready. Everyone has whatever you need to do to get your checks ready. Just fucking do it. I don't want to have these fucking headaches all day. And they responded, and they're like, yep, we're sorry, you're right, good to go. Hey, Emmanuel, glad you can catch us from Nigeria. And they're like, yep, you're right, our fault, won't happen again. So I was like, okay, good, no problem. I will continue working now. So I did that, went back the following week, and they looked at the updates. They're like, yep, looks good, everything looks good. And they cut me a check for the previous 2 weeks, and everything was good, you would think. So I deposited the check, and then 3 days later, I get a notification from my bank saying this check is bounced. We are assessing your bank account like a $25 processing fee. So like I now have to pay for a processing fee for a check that bounced, right? So then at that point, I was like, you know what, guys, screw this. I'm done. You don't owe me any money. I'm just off the project. Like, forget it. I'm off the project. And then the whole Brad and the entire company just lost their shit. They were just like completely like, they're like, this isn't what we talked about. They were sending me emails saying like, a lot of them are really apologetic. Like, look, we're really, really sorry. We're really sorry. We screwed this up. This is our fault. They sent about 20 emails saying that. And then like after about a day or two of that, they started to get hostile. They're like, look, you're being really unprofessional, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is, I didn't respond to a single one of these emails because I was done. What I don't do, because frankly, I'm just too old and I'm too tired, is I don't play games. So like when I say I'm done, like I mean I'm done. Like this is now over for me. I'm moving on to the next thing. It was nice knowing you. We're finished here. But a lot of these startup guys, they don't understand that. They don't see it that way. So they think you're negotiating. That's the way they interpret it. They think you're negotiating. And I'm like, no, the negotiating process is over. We already had that, and I thought we came to terms, but apparently we didn't. So I'm now finished with this relationship. Whatever happens, happens. I don't really care. And they were. Oh, I mean, I wasn't. Top TV clips. I wasn't hostile or anything. I think that's what made them even really more upset. I was just done. I was just like, I'm on to the next thing because I already had clients. Don't forget, I already had other clients. That's a main a key component of this story, of all these stories, by the way. Like it's very rare that I have only one client at a time. So I always juggle 2 or 3. That way, like if funny stuff like this happens, I can just like, push the button on one and like move on to another, and that's it. I mean, I still have to take a hit on like losing a bunch of hours. I don't like that, but it becomes a matter of like where's your time most valuably spent. Right. So like I pull that trigger every now and then. I had to pull it a lot earlier in my career because when I was a junior developer, when I wasn't as good as I am now, I had to deal with a lot lower caliber of client. And that's one of the main points I had earlier in this video, is that as I've gotten better, the caliber of my clients have drastically improved to where I don't really deal with these problems anymore. I just don't. But early on, as a freelancer, as a contract engineer, if you're getting started, especially in a city like New York or San Francisco, you deal with this. You come across this a lot, and it never really gets easier. You just have to move. You never need. It's not about educating the client. It's not about trying to get the client to raise their level. That's never going to happen. What you really need to think is you need to get out of the current level that you're in, and you need to move on to a higher echelon to where the client base is just stronger overall. And that took me a couple of years. That took me about 2 to 3 years. But I'm there now. Like the clients I deal with now aren't these shitty small startups that are all trying to become the next Steve Jobs. Like the clients I have now are like, multi-million-dollar like budget like dev shops and like corporations and banks and stuff like that. Like they're not going to pull those games. Like they don't really care. Like, for some of the clients I have, like $1 million budget isn't even a lot of money. Like they don't care. They just need you to get the work done. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I appreciate. That's the situation I want to be in. Yeah, top TV clips. Same here. It's definitely a different mindset. I guess it's not for everyone. It depends on the kind of person you are, but you have to understand the situations you're going to get into, which is one of the reasons I'm making this video. A lot of people think like, oh, contract, and you're a freelancer, you're a contractor, so you get to make your own hours, you get to go on vacation whenever you want, all of which is true and it's pretty nice, all that's accurate. But I'm trying to point out that there were a lot of like downsides along the way that I had to deal with that I'm glad I don't have to deal with anymore. So yeah, that was another client I had. So the following like 2 to 3 days after that were just like a nonstop barrage of emails saying, going from gradually from like conciliatory and apologetic to gradually to more hostile, more angry, and more more vitriolic. And I really think the part that like just got under the skin was like I just wasn't responding to any of their emails. They were just getting more and more angry. And I was just like, look, I'm not negotiating. I'm just done. Like, that's it. I'm finished. So whatever happens, happens. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, and that's what I mean by this is one aspect of the business that I did not totally understand and appreciate when I first moved to New York City is how much negotiating is done outside of the official negotiating process. And I really took that for granted. I did not understand those dynamics, and I really found it very, very confusing, actually. All these little games that these guys play that they probably read in some management guide in their MBA school that I didn't even understand was happening. Like, for example, this is a very common thing that you're going to come across in the freelance world in major cities. I don't know about small places, but in major cities, you will come across this where they call you in for an interview, let's say at 1 p.m. in their office. You get there at 1 p.m. and guess what? They're not ready. They make you wait until 1:20, 1:25. You're just sitting there waiting because they're just flexing their muscle. That's all they're doing. They're letting you know who's really the boss here. And so, I play along. I always play along first. I always come in with a submissive posture saying, all right, yeah, you're the boss. Like, whatever you say goes. What I do is a little bit of jujitsu, or I establish my dominance after about 3 to 4 weeks, because once they see how good I am at my job and how much they need me, the dynamic changes. And then things we start having conversations like, oh, hey, can you come in the office 3 days a week? And I say, no, I'm gonna work from home from now on. And that's it. And that means I'm gonna work from home. I've had this conversation. Like, this actually happened. And basically what I'm saying is, what are you going to do about it? You're going to fire me? Because you know how good I am now, right? And how hard it was to find me. So good luck with that. So I wait. I play the game of waiting, but I don't have to do that anymore. Like I said, that's something you do with like more amateur level clients. Like these are more beginner level clients, people who are like, mid-20s, early 30s, like doing their first startup. They just quit their law firm because they got tired of working at the law firm, and they raised a couple $100,000 from their parents, and then they want to do a startup. This is a very typical like founder profile that I work with, and they think a certain way, right? And so it took me a couple of years to really calibrate to that, and that's a lot of the friction I experienced early on is a result of my misunderstanding. So let's see what else. Another nightmare. This wasn't really a nightmare client. It was more of a nightmare situation. The client themselves. Oh, thank you, man. Well, I mean, it comes from just abilities. It's not. There were many points where I was very unconfident in my abilities, for good reason, by the way. Pretty much all of 2012, I was very unconfident in my abilities, justifiably so. So going into 2013, I had another client. The client themselves were pretty good, but the situation was a nightmare, and let me elaborate on that. So it was a big iOS app. an enterprise iOS app. We had about 6 engineers working on it, depending on the point in time. And I was hired as like the 4th or 5th one. Obviously, I was more junior. I was hired by 2 senior guys who ran their own dev shop. And then what happened was their code on the iOS app was a complete monstrosity. It was all spaghetti code, non-object oriented. They tried to write like a functional type programming using Objective-C, which is just a terrible mistake. The API was also not non-RESTful. It's almost as if they didn't understand what REST meant. And so, like, forget about a RESTful API. Everything was post calls. There were like gets and deletes and puts. Like they just weren't part of the API. It was literally everything was post. And even if you want to, like, say, fetch like a series of records, you had to send a post request with a very specific way of packaging the body that's unique only to this company, right? So it's just not RESTful at all. And the whole thing started to sort of crumble underneath its own weight after about 6 or 7 months. And I wasn't there all 6 months. I was hired right around this time. So, I'm like 1 or 2 months in, and the code base is just like breaking everywhere, right? The app is just crashing everywhere, and it was just buggy and nothing was working. And it seems like the more we worked on it, the further behind we got. Like everything just kept on like breaking down. And after about 2 or 3 months, the founder, the CEO, he just lost his shit, and he just started throwing tables and chairs and like breaking desks and stuff. And he called the original 2 guys into his office, the 2 guys who hired me, right? And he fired them right there on the spot. He just fired these 2 guys. And these are the 2 guys who hired me. And then next thing you know, it's me and this other guy, the other iOS dev that they hired. We essentially took over the project without meaning to do so. Like it just sort of fell in our laps. And this is what I mean by nightmare situation. They weren't a nightmare client, but the situation was way over my head. Like I was not ready for this. And like obviously the code base was so far beyond repairable that me and the other guy, his name is Gabe. Gabe's a good friend of mine. We were just like, look, it's just time for a rewrite, man. Like we can't work with this code base. It's non-recoverable, and we think it's better just to scrap it and start over. Now, keep in mind, this is like 7 months after they started writing the code, right? After they hired the original 2 guys. And so, so they eventually went along with the plan, but not after doing what's called the clawback. They basically sued the original 2 developers for like a couple $100,000 to get their money back. And that put the scare of God into me, because I was like, good Lord, like I can't imagine working on a project for like 8 months only to be saddled with a lawsuit and give all that money back, right? I don't know what happened with the lawsuit, to be honest. I don't know how that played out, to be honest. I don't know if they ended up giving all their money back, but just imagining that scenario to me, that never left my thought process. So from that point forward, I realized that everything I do with clients has to be documented. Everything I do has to be, somehow in an email or on paper, documented electronically somewhere, somehow, so that if I'm ever in a compromising position, I can always point to something saying, no, you agreed to this. This is what we discussed. I apprised you of all the risks, and I gave you proper, I properly apprised you of all the terms and conditions you need to be aware about. As long as I can do that, then I'm comfortable working on the contract. But the fact that they're looking at a couple $100,000 that they might have to give back was a very frightening situation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the thing, it worked out fine. Like it was a good enough contract, and nothing bad happened to me. But just watching that whole situation play out was very scary. So it was something that I never forgot moving forward with every client thereafter. So that was a large chunk of 2013. I would say that was about the first half of 2013 that I was working on that contract. And then that ended. I took a couple months off after that just because I was a little burned out by that contract. That really took a lot out of me. like emotionally and physically. I was just drained. But after that, by the time I was done with that contract, it was the summer. So I took a little time off. I didn't travel, but I just sort of hung out, if that makes any sense. I hung out a lot, and went to the beach and stuff like that. I just relaxed because I needed to recharge my battery after that sort of nightmare experience. And then I got back in the game after the summer of 2013. I'm sorry, I'm just reading your comment, Emmanuel. It takes a long time to get big clients, have a strong portfolio, but what gets you to reach your current clientele? Because most freelance jobs can be demotivating. Yeah, that's true. Yes, a lot of freelance jobs can be demotivating, and I'm sort of describing some of them right now. What I'm finding, though, is that personally, I find that as I go through more and more of these contracts, as I went through more and more of these contracts, my skill level improved. And then as my skill level improved, the quality of my clients improved. And so, Emmanuel, yes, I agree. When you're dealing with just generally shitty clients, it's very demotivating. It's almost soul crushing, to be honest. And it can really just make you question whether or not you want to do this. I know I did a few times. But like I said, I don't really deal with this kind of client anymore. It's been a couple of years. I'm almost to the end of my story time, actually. Like, I'm almost out of stories as far as like nightmare clients goes, because I've gotten a lot better. I am way better now in 2018 than I was in 2014. Like, a lot better, like undescribably better. And so that comes across in the quality of my work. And so as a result, also my portfolio itself has just grown. Like, I just have a lot more projects on my portfolio now. And so as a result, just who I get as clients these days is just better. I just literally get better clients. And so I don't really deal with these headaches anymore. I mean, I still do occasionally, but nothing to this extent. Nothing along these lines. So, it was if you can get through that initial period, which by initial I mean like a couple of years, like maybe 2 years, if you can just sort of fight through that and continue improving, then you're going to come out on the other side with a reputation. And how do you spot a potential nightmare client? Great question. Actually, that's probably the most important thing at this point. So yeah, I spot nightmare clients every fucking day now. They identify themselves 10 miles away, and I write them off right away. So there are many red flags. Actually, I should have written all these down, but I would say one of the biggest red flags is when a client does not want to discuss numbers right away. So I always ask prospective potential client right away, what's your budget? I charge $150 an hour. Can you afford that? You got to get that out of the way right away. And one of three things will happen. The best case scenario is the client will respond, yep, that's about what we were expecting. So let's discuss the terms of the assignment and whether or not the scope is within your grasp. That's the best outcome. The next likely scenario is the client says, well, we're not sure. Let me think about it, or let's discuss the scope of the project. That's not a good sign. I mean, I wouldn't write it off immediately, but that's a bad sign. And then the next outcome is, no, this is out of our price range. We should move on. That's also a very good sign. That's a good thing. Everyone just saved a bunch of time. So when I'm trying to get the client to commit one way or the other pretty early, so that we can all save time. That's the key here, is to save time. So scenario number 2 is the most frustrating one, where they're like, well, it depends on this and that, and I got to see if we have this in our budget, and whether or not we can discuss some sort of equity package. Once they start doing that nonsense, disengage right away. So the typical sort of early freelancer mentality is like, oh, but what if they can't afford it? Like, what if I'm missing a big opportunity? The answer is, you're not. You want to get that out of your head right away. You're not, because the big boys, they don't fuck around. Like they'll just tell you right away. Like we've allocated $65,000 over a 4-month period. We're hiring 2 engineers or 3 engineers. We need one guy who can do this, and one guy who can do that, one guy who can do this, right? Like they're busy, and they just need to get a solution now, right? And like that's what you want to be working with. When you're dealing with a guy who's like being cagey is the best word I can describe it. They're being cagey, and they start asking you for all these details before divulging any details on your end. So a good example is like they'll ask you all these questions. Basically, what they're doing is fishing for free consulting. They're saying like, "Oh, well, what kind of database do you think we should use?" Or, you know, I heard about AWS, but one of my other engineers said we should use DigitalOcean. What do you think? Right? Like, do you think DigitalOcean is a better option? Should we use Python, or should we use C#, or should we use Node Express? Like, what do you think is a good backend solution for this project? What they're doing is fishing for free consulting without offering you any money, right? Now, I always play a little bit of ball. Like you can answer a few questions, right? I mean, that's just being professional, answer a few questions. But once it becomes a one-way street where it's like, all right, I got some questions of my own. If you're not answering any of them, I have to move on, right? And you don't be afraid to broach the issues early, because really at the end of the day, it's your time that matters the most. So if you're saying something like, look, you know, first answer all their questions, be professional, right? That's just basic professional. Or don't answer all their questions. I should say, like, answer the reasonable questions. And then make sure they answer your questions. If they don't, find a way to politely disengage. You know, find a way to get out of there, to bail out, right? Because that's a red flag. Another red flag, I don't see this as much as I used to. I don't know if that's a sign of the times, or if it's a sign of just my overall like who I interface with more lately. But is dealing with over optimistic people. In startup world where I operate, the founders tend to be unrealistically optimistic. For example, they'll say something like, once we release, we're going to get 10 million users in the first few months. And I'm like, no, you're not. You might get 10 users, not 10,000, like literally 10, 1-0. Like, because of how many startups I've seen where they think this is what's going to happen. And then when the rubber meets the road and they actually, quote unquote, launch their website, they can't even get 1 user, never mind 10 or 10,000 or 10 million. They can't even get one person to organically subscribe, like beyond all their personal friends and family. And I've seen that kill many startups, because what happens is when you're overly optimistic, unrealistically so, you are setting yourself up for inevitable disappointment. And then the question becomes, can you handle that disappointment? Are you prepared for that emotionally? Can you handle that? And most of these people cannot. And they start to flounder, they start to flail. And then they get desperate. That lasts for about 2 months, depending on how tenacious they are, and then they quit. So that was going to be my next story, actually, going into late 2013. That's pretty much exactly what happened. I was working with another startup in New York City, based in Soho, who they were developing an iPad app. It was a hotel kiosk application. That's about as much as I'll get into it. Yeah, Manuel, I've heard a lot. I've heard a lot of yeah. It just gets tiresome after a while, you know. Like it gets tiresome of hearing how I'm working with a startup that's going to change the world and be the next Steve Jobs, and as if they're the first people to tell me that. They're like number 27. All right, I don't want to get into this. So going back to my story, so they were a duo working on a hotel kiosk application that I was building, obviously, and we worked on it for late 2013 going into 2014, so pretty much the duration of the winter. So I was contracting with this duo for maybe 4 or 5 months, just building product for them for 4 or 5 months on the iPhone and the iPad, and doing the back end as well. I was working on a Java-based back end at that point. And what was I going to say? So we finally got to a beta release in the spring of 2014, and then the actual release a couple weeks after that. And they just crickets, nothing. They were just getting no users, like just zero. Right? I mean, they got the beta users, but that was like personal friends and connections and stuff like that. And so their user acquisition and their like retention rates were just crap, just nothing. It was just nothing. And they started to get desperate. So they still had a couple of dollars left from their investment. These guys managed to raise like $1.9 million. Like just how easy it is to raise money for certain people just astounds me. And so, they burned through most of that. By the way, renting an office in Soho. So that's another bet. Going back to your question, Emmanuel, that's a huge red flag. When you raise money and you immediately allocate it on like posh office space in like the most expensive part of the city, if you're renting like a 2,000 square foot office in Soma in San Francisco without product, you're a clown. That's essentially what these guys are doing. So going back to the story, we still had a couple hundred thousand left in the bank, or they did, not me. And so they started getting desperate, and they were going back to their investors, and the investors kept on pointing them in like 10 different directions, which is a very common investor move, by the way. Like I see investors do this all the time, is they start pointing you in 18 different directions, looking for what's called product market fit. That's essentially what this is a race to product market fit. And so, the investors are telling them like, well, look, you need product market fit. So just start trying a million different things and seeing until anything hits, right? So like literally like every week, they would come back with a new idea, like a totally different product that they wanted to build. So I would start working on like one element, right? And then they would come back the next week and they'd be like, oh no, scrap that. We're doing something else now, right? And then I would change gears and start working on that. And next week they would come back after talking to their investors and be like, no, scrap that. We're doing this now. This went on for about a month. And then towards the end of that period, I was like, guys, look, I'm not doing this anymore. Like I'm giving you 2 weeks notice, and then I'm out. And then they were not happy with that. Obviously, that separation was not very good. When I left, whatever I was working on at that point, the product wasn't done because they kept on changing the product. Like they were always developing new product, and so it wasn't done. So then when I left, they hired some other guy who just promptly just shit all over my code. He was just like, this guy was a terrible coder or whatever. And so they were like, look, we're going to want our money back from the previous like 2 or 3 weeks because our new guy says your code doesn't work, right? And so, I mean, it wasn't like we want our money back from like the past 9 months, like the other situation. It was only a couple of weeks. But I was like, no, fuck that. Like this code does work. So here's what's going to happen. I'll come in for 1 day for free. I won't charge for this 1 day. I'll come in for 1 day. The entire day, I'm gonna get that thing to work, and then we're done. I'm never talking to you again. That's it. And then that's exactly what I did. I came in for 1 whole day, and it was like a 6, 7, 8 hour day, and I just got everything working. I connected all the endpoints. I got all the API endpoints working. I rendered all the code, and I said, all right, here it is. Fuck off. I'm done. I'll see you later. They were actually kind of thankful at that point. They're like, oh, it does work. Like they were like happy about that. So, it just, maybe I should have just done that before leaving, probably, but I was already like checked out. So like maybe that was the best way to, I should have preemptively handled that. But the point is like, it was not the most graceful of separations. So obviously that went nowhere. They burned up all their runway, and then I don't know what they're doing now, but that startup didn't go anywhere, as did most of my other startups I worked with. So there are a couple others along the way, not the as the earlier stories. I had one founder cry. He cried because the deal was that I would build his prototype, which I did over about a 2-month period with the money that he raised, and then he would release. And then we agreed to a number of 10,000 registered users within a 1-month period. If he could get that to happen, then I would join him as a co-founder, as a CTO. Which, I mean, it's a win-win for me. You know, if he doesn't hit that number, then I just move on and I get my money anyway. If he does hit that number, then it's actually like pretty respectable that he can do that. That's somebody I do want to work with as a co-founder. Well, after 4 weeks, his number was about 500 registered users. Obviously, most of whom were like his friends and Facebook friends and whatever. And so, yeah, I was like, all right, so, you know, we had this conversation, so see you later. Good luck. I'm out. And he couldn't emotionally handle that. He actually started crying. And I was like, look, man, I'm not like, I don't know what to do in this situation. Like, I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here to manage my career. You know, if you can't handle these situations, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. We all have to deal with disappointment. Right? I deal with way more disappointment than people realize. People have no idea how much disappointment I actually deal with. And I think it's just something that I don't really get into it because nobody cares, but people think it doesn't happen. And that's what this individual doesn't quite understand, didn't understand. It's like, look, this is the game you decided to play. This is how it goes. If you can't handle it, then don't play. This is big boy world. This guy also, he wasn't like a kid. He was like 28. Like he was like 27, 28. And so, yeah, that's it. So I was like, look, I liked working with you. You're a nice guy, but I'm not doing this. So have a good life. And he started tearing up, and that was, I guess that was a nightmare client. I don't know. I mean, he wasn't a shitty client. He paid me on time and everything. He was a nice guy. I like him personally. He might have been a little bit too sensitive though, and maybe he just didn't have the skin for this. You know, I don't think he ever quite dealt with that kind of rejection. Disappointments after the boot camp. Yeah, how much time you got? So, you know, I'm working on Turbo 360. It's going okay. You know, I'm around 4,000 registered users, and a good chunk of those are paying subscribers. So that's going decent. It's actually getting to the point now where it pays for my apartment, which is nice. That's a good thing. I'm on year 6 of my professional career, and this is the first thing in my coding career that's actually going okay, that users are actually using and paying for. Now, can you imagine if I'm on year 6, how many things did I do in years 1 through 5 that didn't work? I don't have time to get into it. It's just too many things. And these are things that I spent thousands of hours on, and probably over $10,000 cumulative across several things. I'll go into one. I'll just go into one just so you can get an idea. So back in 2013, you know, I'm a big sports fan, as you may already know, huge sports fan. And in 2013, I saw that eventually the daily fantasy sports would be humongous, as it obviously is today. But I saw that coming back in 2012 and 2013. So I tried to create an iPhone app for daily fantasy sports, where you can play DFS for football. And I knew that would be, if I can get that to a certain user base by 2015/2016, I would be an acquisition target for FanDuel or DraftKings, which would have been accurate if I could have pulled it off, but my technical skill wasn't there. But I tried anyway. I did try. So I subscribed to these data feeds where I would get the data for the football games. These data feeds cost $800 a month, and that's what I paid for the football season. I paid $800 a month for data feeds from NFL games so that I can leverage that data into my app. And I mean, the data was insane. Like, you get all this like crazy like minutia that like you couldn't even imagine, like third down conversion percentages for the Denver Broncos on night games on the West Coast. Like, it was just crazy, right? And so I put it all together, and I got the app to work. I got the data feeds properly syncing up. I got all the cron jobs going. I got all the data syncing going, and I got everything working from a technical standpoint. And then I submitted to the App Store, and then it just got rejected. And that's it. They sent me like an explanation saying your content, your subject matter is like too adult focused, like it's focused on gambling. We don't support gambling. And I was like, no, you can't actually gamble. Like, you're not gambling here. Like, this isn't like betting on football games. Like, it's daily fantasy. And like, one thing I learned about the Apple submission process is like, there's no like, unless you have real media behind you, unless you have that kind of juice behind you, don't even bother appealing. You're not. It doesn't matter. Basically, some fuckwad at Apple said, screw this guy. I don't care, right? And that's what happened. And so the entire development process for me, however many months it was probably about 3 to 4 months. And then like that 3 to 4 months times the $800 a month data feed just evaporated, just gone, just because I got rejected from the App Store, and that's it. It's pretty disappointing. And that was a couple $1,000s of my own money. Like I don't raise investor money. Like I don't do any of that stuff. Like I didn't ask my mom and dad for this. Like I put in my own money and completely just pissed it away on a situation that was dead on arrival. Like it would have been one thing if I got rejected because the app wasn't good enough. And then, I still would have been disappointed, but I would have been disappointed in myself. I'd have been like, all right, well, I'm not good enough. I need to get better in these areas. It sucks that I spent all this money, but it's on me. I screwed this up. It's my fault. But that's not how it went down. Apple was just like, yeah, whatever, we don't care. That was essentially the turning point for me of migrating away from iOS. So this is late 2013. Right, I was preparing this for the 2013 football season. If you recall, this was the first season that Peyton Manning was playing for the Denver Broncos. I remember it very well because I was tracking all these games to testing my app, and that was the game where the first game, the Thursday night game against the Baltimore Ravens. I think he threw like 7 touchdown passes in like one game, which is outrageous. Like that's probably still his highest scoring fantasy night ever. I was trying to get all my data syncing up and testing against that. That was also the same season I think Odell Beckham had that one-handed catch, or it might have been the next season. I can't remember. It was around that time. So yeah, like just all those efforts were just wasted. At the click of a button, just some guy said reject, and then like just gone. Oh, so going back to my point. That's about when I started to look at other stuff. So 2014 is when I started really picking up the other technology. So the Angulars, the Node, the Express, MongoDB. That was a pivotal point in my career because I was like, all right, this can't continue. I cannot be held hostage to this for my career. So I realized that if I'm going to evolve technically, it's going to have to be beyond iOS. And so that catapulted me into web development. And 2014 for me was the year of Node, Express, Angular. I just picked all that stuff up, and I was like, I need to get better at other stuff because there's no way this can continue. I cannot not continue being in this position, putting my career in this position. So if you want to take a silver lining out of all this, that was the reason I moved over into web development after that experience. So I turned that disappointment into something constructive, or at least I tried to. I mean, I did. The web development is all I do now. I haven't really done professional iOS in a couple of years, unless you count React Native, but I don't. I'm talking like actual Swift Objective-C Xcode. So that was definitely a disappointment. Who asked that question? Was that TV Clips? Or after the boot camp? Yeah, that was definitely a disappointment. I've had many of those. I remember talking to one person who wouldn't do like a free gig starting out. Like he got an offer to do like a free gig as a contract engineer, and he would make money on the back end if the website that they were building made any money, right? And I was like, look, the website's probably not going to make any money, but what else do you have lined up, right? Like, do you have any better options on the plate? Because if no, consider it. Don't write it off so fast because it's still a worthwhile experience. If if it's a good project. Like if you're dealing with like, you know, a decent project, if you're dealing with someone else who's technical and who knows what he's doing, right? And, you know, I told him like, I did a lot of stuff I've never been paid for, and that he was genuinely surprised by that. He was like, really? Like you've done stuff you haven't been paid for? And I was like, good God, you have no idea how much stuff I haven't been paid for that like I'll never get paid for. And like there's just no sense in even like getting hung up over it. Don't like there's no point in getting hung up over it. It just move on. Just take your wounds and move on, right? Just get better. Right? It happens. It happens. And that's it. And I told you a couple stories just now where I haven't been paid, right? Now, if it continues to happen, you know, if you're making the same mistake over and over again, you have to reevaluate. Something's off there. You got to reevaluate. But you know, just because it's free doesn't mean you're being ripped off. You know, just because you're not getting paid doesn't mean there's no value. And that's a message I try to get across a lot, especially to junior developers, because in today's environment, it's different. There's a lot more competition. The barrier to entry is much lower, and so getting in the game is much harder today than it was for me 6 years ago. So this message is even more true today than it was 6 years ago. For example, people offer to work for me for free about once or twice a month, and I always turn them down because I know what it means, what it's going to require from my end to train these individuals. And it's not really free for me, right? So even free isn't free. Like I'm not, for the right person, like if someone wants to work with me, I will guarantee that person a very good first year of freelance revenue. One of my coders on the YouTube channel, Ryan, he's making a ton of money off his freelance contracts because I delivered him all those contracts, because he is worth the time. Ryan is worth the investment, right? And there's more history there anyway. But the point is, finding someone like that is difficult enough. So even if a person offers to work for me for free, I have to evaluate whether or not it's worth my time to get this person up to speed, right? But if the answer is yes, then that person is guaranteed at least a year of contracts off my client base that I don't even have to work for anymore. It's just easy for me. So it's not getting in the game now is harder than it was in 2012, 2013, give or take, just because of the increased awareness, I guess. So many more boot camps, so many more people going to CS majors in college, Code Academy, Free Code Camp, Team Treehouse, like all these things didn't exist, or at least not to the extent that they do right now in 2012. So unique characteristics that I noticed in Ryan, good question. Ryan was one of my paid students going back to 2016. That's correct. Yeah, 2016. So at first, he was just another student, to be honest. There was nothing that immediately made itself aware to me. So I had a class of about seven or eight people, and Ryan was one of those people. Over time, it became very apparent that he was the best one. And by over time, I would say about a month. He just picked up the concepts faster. He just required less explanation. You know, usually one explanation was enough. He understood the concept. He was able to understand seemingly intricate concepts at a higher level, basically simplifying these concepts in his own head without me doing that for him. And that's essentially what coders have to do. They have to think in an abstract basis and deal with a lot of intricate details within hopefully a simplistic framework, a simplistic mindset. That's essentially what you have to do as a coder. And I could just tell Ryan was able to do that. It also just showed up in his work. He was just producing the work, right? And so it was about a month before it became evident that he possessed those skills. And so by the end of the course, I was like, all right, I want to hold on to Ryan, and I'm gonna keep on delivering him as much work as he can handle, which was literally as much work as he can handle. Like, I overloaded him with work because I don't want all of it, and now, like, it's an overflow on his part. So now I'm starting to think of ways to keep this pipeline going, because Ryan's not going to be around forever. He's getting married soon. He's going to go off and start doing his own thing. I need to start figuring out a more steady pipeline for myself, because at the volume of clients that I handle, like, I can't do it all by myself anyway. But finding a reasonable someone else I can delegate to. I mean, I would say Ryan is the first person who's been successful in that capacity for me. I've tried in the past, and they're not. It's just been very, very difficult. So yeah, as far as what characteristics I noticed in Ryan, it wasn't immediate. It wasn't immediately evident. It took a little bit of time, about a month, before I realized this is someone I need to hold on to beyond the course. And that's exactly what happened. So now he's making videos. He's great. Hopefully you guys watch his videos, and hopefully you enjoy them. But that's what I mean. Like, I now delegated the videos to him, because those videos take a lot of time to put together and to edit and to upload, and that's just more time that I need to keep other stuff going, build Turbo, for example, and work on other projects. So yeah, that's how I figured Ryan would be a good solution. So I'm thinking about getting the courses back going again in New York City, the in-person courses, mostly as a pipeline for myself, because like I said, Ryan's not going to be around forever, right? I can't rely on him forever, so I need to build a steady pipeline of talent. And if I can just find 1 or 2 Ryans a year, I'm happy with that, and that's good enough for me. So if I get the courses going back in New York City, that might be the best solution for that. I'm still not sure as far as recruiting goes. It is true that there's a tech shortage in this country. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. There's a tech shortage in this country. People misconstrue that. They think, like, oh, there's all these coders looking for jobs. Like, I hear about this tech shortage. I don't understand. Like, that seems like a contradiction. What you're not hearing is there's a lot of good there's a lot of coders, but there are not a lot of good coders. That's the distinction. Finding a good coder is really, really hard. And then once you do find a good coder, holding on to him is also very, very, very hard. So it's a struggle. And the difference between a good coder and even a mediocre one is a lot. It's a lot. Keep working, keep plugging away. Try to get to that. Don't try to get to that entry level. Like, oh, I got that junior level job. Like, I just got good enough to get into the entry level. Like, I'm no longer a beginner. I mean, yeah, obviously that's important, but you have to understand the game's changed now. It's different. The competition is much higher now than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. And it's only continuing to get higher. And so being just good enough is no longer good enough. You have to be next level. You have to break into that top 10 percentile, where you're clearly head and shoulders above the competition. Essentially, the past 5, 6, 7 years have seen a proliferation of a coding middle class that was probably by design on some level of the big tech corporations, the Amazons, the Facebooks, and the Googles, to drive down wages, right? Probably. So no matter what, like, it happened. It happened. There's a coding middle class now, because there's just so many more programmers, so the wages are being driven down. So now, the days of, like, oh, I'm a Ruby on Rails coder who can do some Angular 1, pay me $100,000. Well, Yeah, maybe in 2012, maybe, but not 2018. That's not going to be the case. So today, it's got to be React, Redux, maybe Angular 2, some sort of TypeScript, and then you still have to have like some Node backend or Python, whatever. Like you gotta be more full package now, because there's so much more competition. And what's the word? Like amazingly, it's still hard to find the really good programmers, right? It's still very difficult to find somebody who can do all those things and not very, very slowly. Like I can find someone who can probably do some React Redux with a Node backend, probably in New York City, at a reasonable rate, like $40 an hour. But that person will take like literally 30 times as long as I would need to do something, right? Like here's a good example. In my last big contract, one of the other junior devs on the team, was learning React Redux on this contract, and so he asked me if he should abstract away a component into we had a couple modals that was rendering the same modal under different component names. So he wanted to refactor that into one component, and then just have a flag determine which modal shows up, which is a good idea. That's the right thing to do. And I said, yep, all right, go for it. And I figured, all right, that's probably like a 2, 3, 4 hours at the most, right? It took him 9 days. 9 days to do that. And I was like, well, if I'd known it was going to take 9 days, I wouldn't have greenlit it, right? And then when it was done, I didn't use it. It was not really usable for various reasons that I want to get into. So that's the difference, right? That's the difference between junior and really like an excellent developer. I mean, maybe it would have taken me more than 4 hours, but it wouldn't take me 9 days, right? And so I greenlit his idea for 2 reasons. Because it was the right idea. You want to refactor duplicate code, DRY, everyone knows that. And number 2, I didn't think I thought it would take 4, 5, 6 hours at the most. One solid day of work, and then on to the next thing. No, 2 weeks later, 9 working days. So 2 weeks later, and then it's finally done, and then it's not usable. So, yeah, it's a tougher environment today to be a beginner. I don't envy your positions if you're just starting out. It's not the same as 2012. But if it's any consolation, it wasn't easy for me either. As some of these stories suggest, I had a hard time myself. Many times where I wasn't paid, many, 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 many rejections that I just can't get into because there's just too many. Tons of rejection. You really have to have like a thick skin for this. You really have to be just used to rejection, which I am, by the way. You just have to be numb to it, is the only way I can put it. Just be numb to rejection, which I certainly am. If you want to be a freelancer in a big city and you're just starting out. I mean, I still get rejected today, but nowhere near the rate that I was in 2012. I still take my hits today, but it's not nearly the ratio that it was 5 or 6 years ago. Okay, so this video went a little bit long. I covered most of what I wanted to, so I'm going to cut it off here. But hopefully there was some good information here, and yeah, I'm going to try and do these videos more often. So if you guys have any good, nothing comes easy in anything, to be honest. If you're a beginner, it's all hard. It's supposed to be hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. Thanks, Emmanuel. So if you guys have any topic suggestions, that would be appreciated. Let me know. Just put it in the YouTube comments when this video gets published, and I'll take it under advisement. I'm always looking for good things to talk about. So, okay, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next live feed.